Hey everybody, back again so soon. Talking today about two most confusing astrology indicators and what they are. These are, this topic was suggested by one of my students. I just had a workshop over the weekend where I talked about quite a lot of things. And one of my students asked me to do this subject because we talked about it, and it was very enlightening to hear these confusing things about astrology. And this is something that I've noticed over doing a lot of readings more than anything else, is that there are certain areas where often people don't really hear the thing you're saying to them. And you'll say, well, I noticed this, you have this tendency. And if it's related to either of these factors, the person is going to not recognize it. They're going to be like, oh, no, that's not right at all. I don't see that. I don't think so. I don't think that's right. So what are the two factors? I haven't said it yet, did I? By the way, we're still dealing with, where are we at here? So I'm actually going to be looking at David Bowie's chart. David Bowie has a couple of those factors, but we're also currently dealing with this moment now where you could see this Venus-Moon conjunction. Venus and the Moon are very close in the sky, so we're dealing with that nice transit right now, this Venus-Moon conjunction. So I'm going to be nice. It'll be happy. I'll be happy. Happy Sam. You like that? Like when I'm happy? So this Venus Moon is still happening right now, and we're going to talk about these two confusing factors. So let me show you what they are. One of them is the 12th house, and one of them is Ketu. These are the two most confusing parts and factors in a chart. And the 12th house is confusing because it's that place of surrender and letting go, and in the other world. It has to do with like imagination and, again, like fantasy and things that are not present. They're not really present in our mind. We're in a kind of fantasy about them, in a kind of fantasy land about them. And we're living the fantasy more than we're living the reality. So, for example, when you get, like we see David Bowie's chart, he's got Jupiter, Mars, and, this is not it. This is his chart. He's got Sun, Mars, and Mercury in his 12th house. He's got a Capricorn rising, and he's got Sun, Mars, Mercury in his 10th house. In his 12th house, excuse me. He's also got Ketu join Venus. But we'll start with the 12th house first. So this means that these planets, Sun, Mars, Mercury, are kind of in this imaginary space, right? It's that sort of letting go space. And so if you were to do a reading for David Bowie, you would be able to see that, especially these two planets that have to do with like power and like masculine power and that that ability and confidence and courage and discipline to like know where you're going and stay on track and be focused, which is the Sun Mars, is kind of confusing. It's like Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where I'm going. I could be going anywhere. Right? I could be going here. I could be going there. And in addition, he also has Mercury there. Mercury is the ninth house ruler, also the sixth house ruler, because Mercury rules ninth house, which is teachings, gurus, and sixth house, which is working hard work, effort. But in particular, the ninth house, which has to do with teachings and gurus and higher wisdom, again, it's in the 12th house. So it's like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I'm following. I'm not sure what the point of all this is. I'm not sure what the highest teaching is or anything like that. Now, again, this makes these things confusing. And it means that he was always searching for a higher meaning, higher purpose. And even that sort of hidden power, bringing out this hidden power, this hidden strength. So as much as he was a very public figure, you could see him being a public figure by this Jupiter in the 10th house for sure. Him as a guide, as an inspiring figure. He also had Moon Saturn in his 7th house and in the sign ruled by the moon. So this is where a lot of his presence and desire to show up really came from. It's also got Venus in the 11th house, which is also wanting to really show up. One thing about Bowie too that I always mention when I talk about his chart is you see this Moon Saturn. So what's one of the key words with Saturn? Serious. And here we're talking about under the moonlight, the serious moonlight. I mean, whoever thinks of the phrase serious moonlight? Has anyone ever thought to put serious and moonlight together? The man with the moon Saturn conjunction in Cancer did, and it's exact. It's like Saturn is 3 degrees past retrograde, and the moon is moving fast toward it. It's about as tight of a conjunction as you could get. And it's in Cancer, the sign ruled by the moon. And he's a Saturn person. He's ruled by Saturn because he's Capricorn. So he looks up at the moon, and in his natal chart, he's got the moon in Cancer. He's a Capricorn, and Saturn was joined his moon. So he sees that moonlight as serious moonlight, right? Got to point that out. But anyway, we're talking about 12th house and Ketu. So again, these 3 planets in the 12th house, he was somewhat confused about his power, masculine power. By the way, he also stated many times about his, sexuality and experimentation and the fluidity of all of that. That's certainly not, I should say, that's certainly seen here. That whole masculinity and, being unsure about it being like a strong force. Underneath it all, I think he identified as being bisexual, but he also wound up being married and having kids and all of that. But anyway, you see these 2 masculine planets, but they're also house rulers. Mars rules the 4th house and the 11th house for Capricorn. So again, even his ambitions at times changing a lot. Sometimes he's focused on this, and his ambition and his desire to make a difference was here. Sometimes it was there. There was so much changing, so much a sort of chameleon way. He was very much like a chameleon. He also, was an actor. He was in a couple films. One was called The Man Who Fell to Earth. Again, the 12th house is the house of like outer space and things not of this earth. I say it all the time. 12th house is things not of this earth. David Bowie literally played a character which was a spaceman. And the Spiders from Mars. Iggy played guitar, right? And the band, one of his characters, Iggy Stardust, was in a band called the Spiders from Mars. Spiders, by the way, have to do with Scorpio, but he's got Mars in the 12th house, right? And Ziggy Stardust was in the Spiders from Mars. And again, I say this because that 12th house is the house of imagination. So even in his imaginations, when he was imagining Ziggy Stardust or whatever, he even pulled Mars out of that. Notice it. He even pulled Mars from his imagination. This hardly ever happens. He even pulled Mars out of his imagination and had the band called the Spiders from Mars. Right? And so, so Mars rules the 4th and the 11th house, right? And like I said, Mercury is the 9th house ruler and goes into the 12th. So again, a lot of his inspiration, which is 9th house, and self-expression came through this 12th house, kind of working through the confusion of not being embodied. And then the sun, of course, is the 8th house ruler, which has to do with change, transformation, death. So again, these things were confusing areas in his life. And what's very powerful is when we take that confusion and use it as a force of good. We use it as a force of good to share what's higher. And he really did that because the you could see also that his 12th house ruler, Jupiter, was in the 10th house. So even his 12th house confusion was brought into the public for us all to see. Again, it doesn't look like confusion when an artist sort of creates it, but even then, even his artistic stuff was many of his characters, and he portrayed a lot of characters. Again, this is also something to understand about the 12th house. It's like this sort of shape-shifting identity that's not really here. So again, the first house is like, here I am, this is me, I'm this person. So you can see a first house artist, someone like Madonna. Madonna is like, it's all me. I'm the one doing it. It's my ego, my persona. These are all different parts of me showing up, right? That's Madonna. David Bowie was like, I don't know who I am. Who do you think I am? Like if you were to ask him who he is, he would be like, I don't know. Who do you think I am? I was Ziggy Stardust. Now I'm the thin white Duke. He had the thin white Duke face when he made Young Americans. Had a whole different persona, different music, different style. This black sort of R&B jazz phase. Then he went through the techno phase with like Scary Monsters. Then the kind of new wave dance phase with the Let's Dance. Always shape-shifting. That's very 12th house. But he would do it in public. We would see it in public with his career, right? So that's the 12th lord, 12th house ruler in the 10th house. 10th house is the public. It's also Libra. So again, he really loved sharing that with other people. And he was said to be a very generous person. But again, if you were to talk to him individually about these things, like the real kind of hard, fast indicators of what the sun is, like what's your vision? Like what's your purpose? What do you do? He'd be like, I don't know. I'm just kind of banging on here trying to say something. I mean, you see him in interviews, he's very, he's got strong opinions about certain things for sure. I mean, especially this Jupiter in the 10th, he was very much about human rights and very much, he was one of the ones who crusaded really strong to get like Michael Jackson and other black artists on MTV. He's the one who actually coined the phrase new wave. At least he was one of the first ones. When they tried to call it something, he said, it's really like a new wave. Like he was very much a very generous person. This was a consistent theme in his life. And of course, the moon, Saturn, these planets and angles gave him a lot of, stability. Like we would see that. But behind the scenes, he was very chameleonic. He was expressing all of these like spacemen, the man who fell to earth. He played the Elephant Man on Broadway. I think it was on Broadway or in a movie. I don't actually remember. But this disfigured person who was really kind of like not of this earth. David Bowie was always portraying something that was not him. It was him in some weird disguise, him taking on a persona, which is not the first house. Again, Madonna is a first house. This is me. Here I am, Madonna. You know who I am? I'm this person, right? So that 12th house sun, like, what's your vision? What's your thing? What's your that? It's like, well, it changes. I don't know. And again, if you get on a very spiritual level, which is what I'm talking about here, and if I were to be trying to do a reading for him and trying to take him into certain things, talking about his mother or his, because Mars rules the 4th and the 11th house, his emotions and his heart, nurturing, and how, ambitious, he would be quite confused. I mean, of course, after a while, we figure it out ourselves, but it would be something that we really are on a journey over. Planets in the 12th house, we're really trying to make them more conscious. They're some of the most confusing energies. We're trying to access it and bring it into the light, bring it into the conscious realm, because the 12th house is the subconscious, unconscious realm. So what he did a lot with his creativity was bringing all of that sort of unconscious fears and stress and worry, pressure, nurturing. And, he also had Mercury there, which is the communicator. So he was writing stuff and, singing and all that. But again, if you were to talk to him about how he's felt about things like this and whatnot, it would be confusing to him. So again, we got to see him play it out in public. But this is why he went through so many changes. Now, the other one, like I said, is Ketu. And again, Ketu is also where we're quite confused about something. And what I mean is this sort of specifically, and when I mentioned this in the weekend with my students, it was actually in the context of when you're trying to do a reading for people. Because part of the weekend retreat that I just did, part of it was teaching them how to do a good consultation, how to do a good reading. First, like how to really see some difficult things in the chart and kind of organize and drill down into them. And the next part was then how to do a reading based on that, how to really organize that so that the reading is structured and the people, you kind of move them through the reading easily. And then I was talking about, and you have to realize when you're talking about planets in the 12th house, you're going to have to take a few whacks at it, because first, they're not going to necessarily understand what you're saying. Like you would say to David Bowie, something like, so you might have had a confusing relationship with your mom. That wouldn't be a bad way to say it. And maybe even your dad as well, because the sun is there and the 4th house ruler. So, even though it might have been a, overall positive relationship where you and her could communicate, there was also things that were very confusing, perhaps, and where you're still really trying to understand, like, her impact. She might have been pretty, formidable and inspiring and whatnot, but be like, well, I don't know. Depending on when you asked him this, he might not really recognize it at all. He'd be like, well, I don't know, that it doesn't really sound right. And then the way you handle that is you say something like, okay, well, let's get back to it. We'll get back to it later. See, because I would also explain things like Mars, the nature of Mars, to have courage to get out there and do the thing. He might very well think, no, I have pretty much a lot of courage to do things. Again, but it might have to go through a process which you have to explain, right? So you got to take a few whacks at it when there are planets in the 12th house, especially a few of them. And then explain, like in his case, why, even though that his chart was like that, he really brought a lot of energy and power to it because Jupiter is in the 10th house. So his 12th house ruler is in the 10th house, right? So then we get to Venus Ketu, which is the other really confusing thing. You see something with Ketu, and you're going to have to take a few whacks at it as well. So as Ketu is with Venus, right, in the 11th house, Venus also rules the 5th house of creativity and the 10th house of career. So it's a very important planet for a Capricorn. And this Ketu, Venus, is, again, Venus, number one, is the karaka, or the indicator of sexuality, relationships, what makes us happy, what makes that exchange of happiness with another person. So when it's in Scorpio, it's quite emotional, very, sort of intense and passionate. And Ketu is very sharp and focused, where, again, it can mean a lot of experimentation, but then frustration with it, like a lot of intense experimentation, but then rejection of it. So that could be wild swings. Again, sometimes, maybe he felt like a woman. Other times he felt like, being with a woman. Other times he felt like a man. He wanted to be with a man. It was like, so that kind of chameleon nature, even with his sexuality, you could see. But if you try to describe the essence of it, that it's really about trying to find that most refined form of enjoyment and pleasure, and that it's actually even something where there's a sort of rejection of the sensuality, of the beauty. Again, I'm good at explaining these things, so people can usually get it because I've explained them quite a lot in my life, doing more than a couple hundred readings a year for 15 years or however long it's been. But you might have to take a few whacks at it, right? And it's quite a bit to get your head into. So again, you might have to say it once, and then they're like, I'm not really sure. And you don't want to leave things like that. So I'll usually tell them, I'll say something like, well, sometimes this is a little hard to figure out or to get at first, but we'll come back to it. And you get them to explain what part of what you said didn't sound right. Sometimes that helps to really clear it up as well. But you also know that you'll come back to it and you'll see it over and over again, especially if it's something that's important in the dashas or whatever. So these are definitely two of the most important two of the most important things that are confusing, again, not just in charts that you're reading as an astrologer, but for you as someone who's trying to, understand your chart or what have you. And, the thing is, we have, we all have also the 12th house ruler, which I also mentioned. The 12th house ruler is also central here because it's the planet that obviously rules that area of life, rules that subconscious, unconscious, imagination realm. And wherever it's going in the sky, and, if it's interacting with a lot of things in the natal chart, it brings that confusion into it. So like myself with Gemini, my 12th house ruler is Venus. So again, even though Venus is very powerful planet for Gemini, it rules their 5th house of creativity. But it also rules the 12th house of like imagination, maybe confusion, trying to bring that beauty and creativity into the light. So the 12th house ruler is always the planet that's trying to bring something into the light, trying to make something more conscious. That's what the 12th house ruler is doing. And it's doing it by the other house that it rules is a big part of it, and through its nature. So again, like I was just saying with Gemini, Venus rules the 12th house and 5th house. So it rules these two houses, like if you're reading the chart from Gemini, and it's trying to take that 12th house and bring it into the 1st house to make it more conscious, because this is the subconscious, the in-between life state, that sort of dream state. So again, people who have a lot of planets in the 12th house, sometimes they'll literally kind of really like to sleep a lot. They'll sleep a lot. They'll dream a lot. They put a whole lot of importance on their dreams a lot of the time, right? And again, sometimes they can live in a kind of dream, in a kind of fantasy about things. And they're trying to drag, and in a positive way, like, for example, even in David Bowie's way, they're trying to sort of drag that fantasy into the reality and make that fantasy the reality, right? And so, again, look at your chart. Like, for example, if you're Aries, the 12th house ruler is Jupiter. And it also rules the 9th house. So Aries is trying to bring that inspiring teacher guru fantasy into the light. Again, because this is why Aries always sees himself as the great crusader following the righteous path, the righteous course. Aries has a lot of that because Jupiter is the ruler of the 9th house and the 12th house. So wherever Jupiter is, their nature to see themselves as like the righteous warrior, bringing the truth out, winds up being shown, that quality of them. So this is a big thing. So Joshua says maybe talk in their sleep. Yeah, they definitely could. Definitely could. Joshua said, what if the same Venus in the case of Gemini goes in the 6th house with, let's say, Mercury? Well, obviously it happens. It's the 12th house ruler. And now the 12th house ruler would be joined Mercury, the 1st house ruler. So again, you would just see now there's a connection between that kind of fantasy, dream life, dream state existence. And then it's in the 6th house, which is about work, effort, and trying to make it more practical and bring it out into the light, for example. Joshua says he has my book and it's very insightful, quality stuff. Thank you. Claire's thanking me for all the videos. You're welcome. You know what happened? Saturn actually moved out of my 7th house. That was really the big thing. It shifted, actually. As Saturn shifted, since then I felt a lot. I've just, it was a intense transit because I got Gemini ascendant and Saturn was going through Gemini all that time. It's kind of like, okay, I kind of feel like that a lot of that has sort of moved, right? So the Love Oracle Tarot says, so since the soul is the Atman, then Mercury and Mars brought the soul to light through the 12th house. So the soul, I guess you mean is sun. Yeah, so that's definitely kind of simple way to really look at it. So again, planets in the 12th house are trying to become more conscious, trying to be more aware. So yes, when the sun is in the 12th house, it's this hidden power, like I said, this hidden soul power, this hidden confidence. So people would probably be surprised that underneath it all, he was maybe quite shy or quite, one of the things that you can notice about him, and you can notice it just in his demeanor, was he was quite like effeminate. He wasn't gay, but he was quite soft in the way he talked. Even like the way you hear me talk, I'm like, right? You hear other people talk. He had those 2 masculine planets in the 12th house. So he rather talked like this. He talked like this. It was very kind of calm demeanor. I don't have a good British accent. But you really saw that the way he talked was very kind of, I don't know, sort of like Moon Saturn energy. Very sort of soft, right? So you even saw that in the way he spoke, in his mannerisms. I mean, even the way he played, even the way he played instruments and stuff, he would get out there and dance. It was actually kind of stiff. He would do this kind of stiff sort of dancing, but then he would do like his, this kind of, it wasn't like this physical kind of dance. Even like you see Madonna dance, right? Like, look at Madonna. She's a good example because all this dance is so like choreographed and sharp and energetic, and she's like nailed in it, man. She's committed. Even Bowie's dancing is kind of like, let's dance. He's just like kind of sort of stiff, almost Saturn, like almost like a dancing skeleton or something. He was always like, wasn't really graceful, even the way he kind of bopped around. It was, I'm saying this because these two masculine planets in the 12th house, it's like, again, all that power that you get in the physical body when you're physically, like, again, like dancing or even walking with a kind of a strut or kind of, that's what you see with masculine planets. Whether it's a man or woman, you'll see that kind of, direct. And you see how they were both hidden, these two masculine planets. Now, the one that wasn't was Jupiter in the 12th. So Jupiter in the 10th. That's probably his most stable masculine energy, is that Jupiter in the 10th was like, okay, yes, this is my work. This is what I'm here to do. And he felt like, okay, that really pulls me along, right? Those two masculine planets in the 12th still kept that sort of almost kind of shy, like, sort of nature. You see, he wasn't a big, even though he was well known, he wasn't a big celebrity hog, like, again, wanting to be out in public doing that. He was, unless it was work or something that he was inspired to do. He would take real sabbaticals. He'd kind of disappear, and then he would reappear again as another character, at least publicly. So Malini Iyer says, I've somewhat gotten a hold of my moon in 12th house, but when you spoke about Ketu, it was a call for me to examine my blind spots in that area when I thought I had done enough work. I have more blind spots to look at, but it needs to be done. Well, we all do. We all have Ketu somewhere. And you can really see the Ketu with, we can really see the Ketu with when it's joined planets. So when Ketu's by itself, it'll show it with that area of life. Like with me, I have it in the 7th house. So there's going to be blind spots there. But again, Ketu also brings a lot of scrutiny as well. So it's also something that we'll examine a lot, but we'll also have a lot of blind spots there. So we think we know more than we know, or maybe we kind of know it, but we don't embody it. We're not living it so well because Ketu is like, oh, I already know that. I don't need to do that. I don't really need to embody that part of it because I already know it. So this is the blindness of Ketu when you have, when Ketu is even really powerful, because yes, the soul has maybe lived through certain things, so we don't feel like we need to embody that or repeat that again. And maybe in our mind we don't, but we haven't really integrated it, maybe even in this lifetime, until we re-embody that, right? And again, Rahu is the other end of the node. Rahu is where we want to embody everything that Rahu is doing. We want to get some of that and really live it. Ketu is like, oh, I've already lived all this. I've lived all that. I've lived all that. And all that's just, I don't need to do any of that. Where, of course, that's a huge blind spot. So we have to do it. But Ketu often doesn't want to do it. He kind of rejects it. So again, back to Bowie's chart, you can see it's also there in the 11th house with Venus. So again, he lived a very public life, but part of it was also this trying to, like, even crafting those personas, those public personas, to be these sort of perfect, this sort of perfect embodiment of a new kind of image. A lot of that kind of perfection and mastery and attention to detail and all that, that's really Ketu stuff. That's very much Ketu stuff. And this is the kind of thing that also makes us a good artist, songwriter. You hear the songs that Bowie wrote that were so innovative. They were so progressive for his time. Bowie came out of the late 60s. It wasn't even the 70s. Bowie came out of the late 60s. His first big hit, Ground Control to Major Tom. That one? This is ground control to Major Tom. Yeah. A Major Tom to ground control. Sorry. That was actually written the first time and released in like 1969 or something. Back when the US landed on the moon. It was released then, but it didn't take off as much. Then it was re-released years later. But he actually started in the late 60s under the name Davy Jones. His real name was David Jones. But there was already a guy in the Monkees named Davy Jones. There's this band on TV called the Monkees and named Davy Jones. So he changed his name to David Bowie. But he started in the late 60s. honing that and crafting that persona. His first songs was under the name of Davy Jones, I think. David Jones or something. Then he came out as David Bowie, and he had these crafted personas of, especially like the Ziggy Stardust, the Thin White Duke, the persona in Let's Dance. There was a time with what was called Crazy Monsters. He had other kind of personas. As he got older, he had less with personas because he occupied his own skin with more comfort. You started to see, especially in the mid-'80s, he started doing a lot of things with, like after the Let's Dance thing. In the mid-late 80s, he started doing duets or started doing songs with like Queen. He did Under Pressure. He did a thing with Mick Jagger, I think, the Dancing in the Streets, whatever it was. A few things like that. And he stopped crafting so many personas because I think what happened is he became more comfortable in his own skin as a performer and not necessarily hiding behind this chameleonic persona. And again, we can see that sort of chameleon persona in all that energy in the 12th house. And we also see that his first house ruler, Saturn, is all the way away. It's furthest away from him when it's with the moon, which is also kind of watering down his own like solid identity. It was in the waters of the moon and the waters of Cancer. So he had a very watery self-image. And these two most confusing factors, especially Ketu and the 12th house, he had a lot of energy sort of clunking around in those areas, which led to that sort of nature. Roxanne says, planet Earth is doomed and there's nothing I can do. I thought it was planet Earth is blue. That's from Space Oddity. It's called Space Oddity. So do you think Rahu contributed to his mysterious fame or talent? Well, he has Rahu in the 5th, so that definitely shows that unusual talent and that obsession to create. But the other things I said also do. He's got the 5th house ruler. So again, Rahu is in the 5th, but the 5th house ruler, Venus, is with Ketu. Ketu is like otherworldly. I mean, so is Rahu. Both of the nodes are. But so Venus, that indicator of creativity, where someone finds beauty, where someone finds happiness. Again, it's in Scorpio where they're trying to really grapple with these deeper mysteries and potential ugliness of life, and also with Ketu. But you see in his songs like the range of feeling and whatnot, but also, you think of songs like Changes, where he's talking about the new wave that's coming. Changes, trying to face the strain. Changes, don't want to be a richer man. Oh, look out, you rock and rollers, right? These are the things, these were the messages, right? Pretty soon I'm going to be older. He was also, time may change me, but I can't trace time. He's talking about, obviously, changes of time. Again, he's a Capricorn and all this, but you see him always things toward the future, very futuristic, very groundbreaking, very harmonizing and bringing in all kinds of different influences and making them his own. Bowie was a master at taking, he always danced at the edge of every trend and utilized it, but in his own way, made it his own by also, again, by making it totally personal. One of the biggest incidents he did with music, I happen to love his music, but was when he went through they call it the Thin White Duke phase, where he was, the album and the music was Young Americans and also Fame, and these, where he was using different instruments, but mainly he got into this R&B kind of feel. And you listen to a song like Young Americans where he's singing like he's got these, backup singers, doo, 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 and this kind of thing like you would do in Motown, or this kind of R&B soul but it was totally him. It was totally his groove. It was his own, excuse me, it was his own way of doing it. It wasn't a ripoff, but you could hear the influence, but it was total soul, like blue-eyed soul, I think is what they called it. And it was just incredible, his talent and his ability to hybridize things and different movements and make them his own. Like the dance movement, like Let's Dance, that whole album, China Girl and all that. I remember that was huge when it came out in the early 80s. Totally just took that MTV dancey new wave and mixed it with his own thing, which was still rock and roll and still a driving beat, but the production and the style of the time. It was just, that's called talent, folks, in short supply these days, but that's where you get it. That's where you see things like this crazy K2 Venus. It's the perfectionism I want you to get from K2, right? K2's not satisfied to just keep doing the same thing. So many bands and performers, they just keep grinding out the same hit. They just keep grinding out the same thing that was popular. It's the easy thing to do. This is why most of them their careers are short. They do a couple things and they're like, okay, this is us. Now let's do it again. Let's do it again. That's what people like. Let's do it. That's not what Rahu and K2 and all this 12th house. This is an artist and he wasn't even just doing music. He was acting. He was doing all kinds of stuff, challenging himself as an artist to express all of this hidden power. But you'd see him like morph into different situations. And then that innate talent and that innate attention to detail and passion would now express itself this way, right? So it's a great case study. But again, we're talking about it. I just want to, the point here is that these are things that are often confusing. And of course, artists, they can take what's confusing and create art with it. Many of us don't, and so when I was talking to my students about these things, again, just to kind of go back, that the point even of the conversation when I was in the class was to let people know, I forgot to turn the light on again, that these are things that when you see them in readings, they're often confusing to people, and you might have to take a couple whacks at them to get people to hear and understand them. So that's K2 and the 12th house. So anyway, guys, I'm glad if you like this, share it with others. And I did also, again, some of you who maybe haven't, oops, that's not what I wanted to post. So people were asking me lately also about I just did something on Venus, excuse me. As you know, right now we're dealing with this these transits. Right now they look like this. So I'm in a good mood. I'm being happy. Enjoy it. I'm not always happy. Kidding. No. So you can see this Venus moon. Look up in the sky and see Venus moon. And if you want to understand, again, a lot of big, important Venus energy right now. By the way, everybody can thank Leisha Kali. She's the one who recommended it. She's the one who recommended this subject. There you go, Roxanne. And I'm floating in a most peculiar way. And the stars look very different today. For me, am I floating in a tin can? Far above the moon, planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do. And then it goes into that that total like break. What a crazy singer. What a crazy songwriter, man. The guy was amazing. So, all right. So, yeah, it was Leisha Kali who recommended the subject. And again, if you want to also now it's big Venus stuff right now. I just did a conversation about it yesterday, where Venus is now exalted, but then it's going to go into Taurus. Oops, pulled up here. Venus is now exalted, but it's going to go into Taurus, where it's going to be there for like 4 months. So you should really get your handle and get your head around what's going on with Venus in the next few months, okay? Very important. And so, again, I put that link in there to the Venus web class. Some people even already went after and came back and said, that was amazing. That was a great web class. Margarita, wasting away again in Margaritaville, looking for my lost shaker of salt. Some people claim that there's a woman to blame, but I know it's my own damn fault. Sorry. I'm kind of liking the dark now. This dark is very good for this theme of the 12th house and K2, isn't it? Maybe I'll just keep this open till this whole thing just becomes pitch black and I just completely disappear. Wouldn't that be cool? I'm not going to do it, but I'm not turning the light on today. I'm just going to bask in the glow of the theme of the day, which was the most confusing aspects of astrology. Yes, it was the Love Oracle Tarot that said it was awesome. I did the Venus class last night. Isn't it? Absolutely. And so Shivakami, it certainly did work. It did work. I put it again. It works. So anyway, we're not going to end this with a technical issue. So anyway, you take care, folks. Have a good one, and we'll see you soon.